Welcome back. I will be in this video. I'll cover the risk management policy. If you hear a lot of background noise, it's because I'm sitting in the garden, and it's next to the garden is next to a road, so you might hear some background noise. Anyway, I'll be covering the risk management policy from the Datica website, and this is an effort to incorporate all these policies into my product. This is the first time I'm reading it, so you can follow along while I'm going through this. So the risk management policy says, this policy establishes the scope, objectives, and procedures of Datica's information security risk management policy. Okay. The risk management process is intended to support and protect the organization and its ability to fulfill its mission. Okay. So there is, the risk management basically is intended to support and protect the organization and its ability to fulfill its mission. So the applicable standards, looks like there are 3 applicable standards from High Trust CSF. They are a risk management program, performing risk assessments and risk mitigation. And so there are 3 applicable standards from HIPAA security rule. They are the HIPAA security rule risk analysis, HIPAA security rule risk management, and HIPAA security rule evaluation. Okay. So risk management policies. So it is the policy of Datica to conduct thorough and timely risk assessments of the potential threats and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronic protected health information. It stores, transmits, and/or processes for its customers, and to develop strategies to efficiently and effectively mitigate the risks identified in the assessment process as an integral part of Datica's information security program. So I think the risk management policy basically covers the policy that tells how thorough and timely risk assessments will be done. Risk assessments of potential threats and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality. Risk analysis and risk management are recognized as important components of Datica's corporate compliance program and information security program. In accordance with risk analysis and risk management implementation specification within the security management standard and the evaluation standards set forth in the HIPAA security rule. So basically they're saying risk analysis and risk management, they are recognized as important components of Datica's corporate compliance program and information security program. So this is done in accordance with the security management standard and standards set in the HIPAA security rule, and they gave the HIPAA security rules here. This is basically this is being done as to fulfill this HIPAA security rule. Risk assessments are done throughout product life cycles. Okay. Before the integration of new system technologies and before changes are made to Datica physical safeguards, and these changes do not include routine updates to existing systems, deployments of new systems created based on previously configured systems, deployments of new customers, or new code developed for operations and management of the, Datica platform. So basically, risk assessments are done throughout the product lifecycle and before integration of new system technologies and before changes are made to Datica physical safeguards. So anytime any changes are done, risk assessments are done to make sure um, there are no vulnerabilities, and so while making changes to Datica physical equipment and facilities that introduce new and untested configuration. Okay, this looks like a repeat. Okay, this is physical equipment. So both, okay, even when there is physical equipment changes, it's done. So when there is software, when there are software changes that are done, then risk assessment is done at that time also. And the fourth point is Datica performs periodic technical and non-technical assessments of the security rule requirements, as well as in response to environmental or operational changes affecting the security of EPHI. Okay. Datica implements security measures sufficient to reduce risks and vulnerabilities to a reasonable and appropriate level. So basically, they're saying Datica will implement security measures sufficient to reduce risks and vulnerabilities to a reasonable and appropriate level to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all EPHI Datica receives, maintains, processes, and or transmits for its customers. So Datica implements security measures to sufficient to reduce risks and vulnerabilities to a reasonable and appropriate level to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all EPHI Datica receives, maintains, processes, and or transmits for its customers. Okay. Protect against any reasonably anticipated threats or hazards to the security or integrity of customer EPHI. Protect against any reasonably anticipated uses or disclosures of customer EPHI that are not permitted or required, and ensure compliance by all workforce members. Hmm. Mhm. Protecting. Okay. Protect against any reasonably anticipated threats or hazards to security or integrity of customer PHI. Protect against any reasonably anticipated users or disclosures of customer EPHI that are not permitted or required. Ensure compliance by all workforce members. Okay. Any risk remaining after other risk controls have been applied requires sign-off by the senior management and Datica security officer. All Datica workforce members are expected to fully cooperate with all persons charged with doing risk management work, including contractors and audit personnel. Any workforce member that violates this policy will be subject to disciplinary action based on the severity of the violation as outlined in the Datica roles policy. Okay. The implementation, execution, and maintenance of the information security risk analysis and risk management process is the responsibility of Datica's security officer or designated employee and the identified risk management team. All risk management efforts, including decisions made on what controls to put in place, as well as those to not put into place, are documented, and the documentation is maintained for 6 years. Okay. The details of risk management process, including risk assessment, discovery, and mitigation, are outlined in detail below. The process is tracked, measured, and monitored using the following procedures. The security officer or privacy officer initiates the risk management procedures by creating an issue in the JIRA Compliance Review Activity Project. The security officer or the privacy officer is assigned to carry out the risk management procedures. Okay, all findings are documented in approved spreadsheet that is linked to the issue. Once the risk management procedures are complete, along with corresponding documentation, the security officer approves or rejects the issue. If the issue is rejected, it goes back for further review and documentation. If review is approved, the security officer then marks the issue as done, adding any pertinent notes required. It's like pretty standard process. They open a ticket to initiate risk management procedures, and then someone is assigned to it, they work on it, and they document all the findings in an approved spreadsheet that is linked to the issue. Once the risk management procedures are completed, the security officer either approves or rejects. If the issue is rejected, it goes back for further review and documentation. If the review is approved, the security officer marks the issue as done. If needed, adds notes to it. Okay. The risk management procedure is monitored on a quarterly basis using JIRA reporting to assess compliance with above policy. Okay. So basically, all these things, the entire HIPAA, if they're HIPAA compliant or not, I think that will be done once a year. But there is a quarterly task to monitor the risk management procedure itself. Sounds good. So, risk management procedure. The intent of completing a risk assessment is to determine potential threats and vulnerabilities and the likelihood and impact should they occur. The output of this process helps to identify appropriate controls for reducing or eliminating risk. Okay. So system characterization. The first step in assessing risk is to define the scope of the effort. To do this, identify where EPHI is received, maintained, processed, or transmitted. Using information gathering techniques, the Datica platform boundaries are identified. Output. Characterization of Datica platform system assessed, a good picture of the platform environment, and the delineation of platform boundaries. So basically, the first step in assessing risk is to define the scope of the risk. So to do that, we have to identify where EPHI is received. In our case, EPHI is received in multiple ways. So the users register. Not only that, we get pharmaceutical, we get prescription data via files. Those are the two main ways data gets in. Oh, we also get data from DEA. We also get data from other sources. Characterization of Datica platform system assessed, a good picture. Okay. So the output will be characterization of the Datica platform system assessed, a good picture of the platform environment, and delineation of platform boundaries. Okay. Step 2. So once the initial scope is defined and an output created, the step 2 is threat identification. So let's say we are getting data via SFTP. So we'll have to define, we have to see how to identify potential threats when someone is sending data using SFTP. So potential threats, the potential for threat sources to successfully exercise a particular vulnerability are identified and documented. All potential threat sources, through the review of historical incidents and data from intelligence agencies, the government, etc., to help generate a list of potential threats. All potential threat sources through the review of historical incidents and data from intelligence agencies. Okay. So the output of this step is a threat list containing a list of threat sources that could exploit platform vulnerabilities. Okay. Step 3. Step 3 is vulnerability identification. Here we have to develop a list of technical and non-technical platform vulnerabilities that could be exploited or triggered by potential threat sources. Vulnerabilities can range from incomplete or conflicting policies that govern an organization's computer usage to insufficient safeguards to protect facilities that house computer equipment, to any number of software, hardware, or other deficiencies that comprise an organization's computer network. So saying we have to develop a list of technical and non-technical platform vulnerabilities that could be exploited or triggered by potential threat sources. Output, a list of platform vulnerabilities, observations that could be exercised by potential threat sources. Okay. Step 4, control analysis. Document and assess the effectiveness of technical and non-technical controls that have been or will be implemented by Datica to minimize or eliminate the likelihood, probability of a threat source exploiting a platform vulnerability. Okay. So list of current or planned controls, policies, procedures, training, technical mechanisms, insurance, etc. used for the platform to mitigate the likelihood of a vulnerability being exercised and reduce the impact of such an adverse event. Step 5. Likelihood determination. Determine the overall likelihood rating that indicates the probability that a vulnerability could be exploited by a threat source given the existing or planned security controls. Impact analysis. Determine the level of adverse impact that would result from a threat successfully exploiting a vulnerability. Factors of the data and systems to consider should include the importance to Datica's mission, sensitivity and criticality, costs associated, loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems and data. Determine the overall likelihood rating that indicates the probability that a vulnerability could be exploited by a threat source. Okay. So the output will be something like, hey, magnitude of the impact, low 10, medium 50, high. Oh, we have to refer to the NIST definitions for low, medium, and high. I'm guessing. Okay. Risk determination. Establish a risk level by multiplying the ratings from the likelihood determination and impact analysis. A risk level is determined. This represents the degree or level of risk to which an IT system, facility, or procedure might be exposed if a given vulnerability were exercised. The risk rating also presents actions that senior management must take for each risk level. Okay, so looks like output of this step will be risk level. What is the risk level? And the score, we have to get this score by looking at NIST NIST SP 830 definitions for low, medium, and high. Step 8, control recommendation. Identify controls that could reduce or eliminate the identified risks as appropriate to the organization's operations to an acceptable level. Factors to consider when developing controls may include effectiveness of recommended options, legislation and regulation, organizational policy, operational impact, and safety and reliability. Control recommendations provide input to the risk mitigation process, during which the recommended procedural and technical security controls are evaluated, prioritized, and implemented. Output. Recommendation of controls and alternative solutions to mitigate risk. Step 9, results documentation. Results of the risk assessment are documented in an official report, spreadsheet, or briefing, and provided to senior management to make decisions on policy, procedure, budget, and platform operational management changes. Output. A risk assessment report that describes the threats and vulnerabilities, measures the risk, and provides recommendations for control implementation. Okay. So next section is risk mitigation. Risk mitigation involves prioritizing, evaluating, and implementing the appropriate risk-reducing controls recommended from the risk assessment process to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of Datica platform EPHI. The risk mitigation involves, I think, after the risk assessment, the previous step, whatever is found. So after this step, risk assessment, they assess the risk, and mitigation is how do we mitigate the risk? How do we prioritize? What do we prioritize higher to mitigate the risk, so that we maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the application. Determination of appropriate controls to reduce risk is dependent upon the risk tolerance of the organization, consistent with its goals and mission. So step 1, prioritize actions. So using results from step 7 of the risk assessment, sort the threat and vulnerability pairs according to their risk levels in descending order. This establishes a prioritized list of actions needing to be taken with the pairs at top of the list requiring the most immediate attention and top priority in allocating resources. So basically they're saying in risk mitigation you have to prioritize actions. That means we sort threat and vulnerability pairs according to risk levels in descending order. So basically the one with the highest score will be at the top, obviously, highest risk items. And we take the topmost item first and assign resources to fix or mitigate the risk. Output is actions ranked from high to low. Okay. Evaluate recommended control options. So risk mitigation, I think, also includes what are the recommended control options. Although possible, controls for each threat and vulnerability pair are arrived at in step 8 of risk assessment. Review the recommended controls and alternative solutions for reasonableness and appropriateness. The feasibility, example, compatibility, user acceptance, etc., and effectiveness, degree of protection and level of risk mitigation of the recommended controls should be analyzed. In the end, select a most appropriate control option for each threat and vulnerability pair. Output, list of feasible controls. Conduct cost-benefit analysis. Determine the extent to which a control is cost-effective. Compare the benefit of applying a control with its subsequent cost of application. Controls that are not cost-effective are also identified during this step. Analyzing each control or set of controls in this manner and prioritizing across all controls being considered can greatly aid in decision-making process. So the output of cost-benefit analysis is a documented cost-benefit analysis of either implementing or not implementing each specific control. Step 4, select controls. Taking into account the information and results from previous steps, Datica's mission and other important criteria, the risk management team determines the best controls for reducing risks to the information systems and to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of EPHI. These controls may consist of a mix of administrative, physical, and/or technical safeguards. Output is selected controls. Step 5, assign responsibility. Identify the workforce members with the skills necessary to implement each of the specific controls outlined in the previous step. Also identify the equipment, training, and other resources needed for the successful implementation of controls. Resources may include time, money, equipment, etc. Output is a list of resources, responsible persons and their assignments. Step 6. Develop safeguard implementation plan. Develop an overall implementation or action plan and individual project plans needed to implement the safeguards and controls identified. The implementation plan should contain the following information. Each risk or vulnerability slash threat pair and risk level, prioritized actions, the recommended feasible control for each identified risk, required resources for implementation of selected controls, team member responsible for implementation of each control, start date for implementation, target date for completion of implementation, maintenance requirements, the overall implementation plan provides a broad overview of the safeguard implementation, identifying important milestones and timeframes, resource requirements, interrelationships between projects, and any other relevant information. Regular status reporting of the plan, along with key metrics and success indicators, should be reported to Datica senior management. So individual project plans for safeguard implementation may be developed and contain detailed steps that resources assigned carry out to meet implementation timeframes and expectations. Additionally, consider including items in individual project plans such as a project scope, a list deliverables, key assumptions, objectives, task completion dates, and project requirements. So the output is a safeguard implementation plan. Man. Step 7. Implement selected controls. As controls are implemented, monitor the affected systems to verify that the implemented controls continue to meet expectations. Elimination of all risk is not practical. Depending on individual situations, implemented controls may lower a risk level but not completely eliminate the risk. Continually and consistently communicate expectations to all risk management team members, as well as senior management and other key people throughout the risk mitigation process. Identify when new risks are identified and when controls lower or offset risk rather than eliminate it. Additional monitoring is especially crucial during times of major environmental changes, organizational process changes, or major facilities changes. If risk reduction expectations are not met, then repeat all or part of the risk management process so that additional controls needed to lower risk to an acceptable level can be identified. Output is residual risk documentation. Next one is risk management schedule. The two principal components of risk management process, risk assessment and risk mitigation, will be carried out according to the following schedule to ensure continued adequacy and continuous improvement of Datica's information security program. Scheduled basis. An overall risk assessment of Datica's information system infrastructure will be conducted annually. So the assessment process should be completed in a timely fashion so that risk mitigation strategies can be determined and included in the corporate budgeting process. Throughout a system's development life cycle, from the time that a need for a new untested information system configuration and or application is identified, through the time it is disposed of, ongoing assessments of the potential threats to a system and its vulnerabilities should be so they're saying throughout the software systems development life cycle, from the time that a need for a new untested information system configuration and or application is identified, throughout the time it is disposed of, ongoing assessments of the potential threats to a system and its vulnerabilities should be undertaken as a part of maintenance of the system. As needed, the security officer or risk management team may call for a full or partial risk assessment in response to changes in business strategies, information technology, information sensitivity, threats, legal liabilities, or other significant factors that affect Datica's platform. Process documentation. Maintain documentation of all risk assessment, risk management, and risk mitigation efforts for a minimum of 6 years. Okay, so all this documentation has to be available for a minimum of 6 years. Cool. That's the risk management policy. So in the next video, I'll cover roles policy. How big is roles policy? Okay. So I'll cover roles policy in the next video.